At my daughter's beach wedding, just as the sun was sinking into the waves off the coast of Cape Cod, her new husband leaned toward me and said with a smirk, $50,000 for the luxury of being part of this celebration. Otherwise, you vanish from our lives forever. I blinked, trying to process the cruelty in his voice. Before I could respond, my daughter, Rachel, added with a sip of champagne and a dismissive glance, or, enjoy the peace and quiet of a retirement home. Your choice, Mom. They stood there in front of me like a pair of polished porcelain figurines. Glamorous, confident, unshakable in their entitlement. I smiled, lifted my glass, and whispered, "You forgot one thing." The air around us seemed to still. Just for a second. A gust of sea breeze lifted the edge of my shawl, and the sound of the waves crashing behind us filled the silence that followed. Their faces paled. Not dramatically, not instantly, but just enough for me to see at the flicker of doubt the edge of fear. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't argued. But something in my tone, in the certainty behind my words, had landed, and they knew. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning for this moment for months. I hadn't come to the wedding unprepared. I hadn't come simply to be humiliated. No, I came knowing exactly who they had become and what they thought I was. They believed I was weak, alone, easy to discard. They forgot that I had built my life from nothing once before. And I could tear down theirs without ever lifting my voice. You forgot one thing, I repeated softly, the wind carrying my words out to sea. Then, I excused myself to powder my nose, leaving them standing there. Because the storm they had summoned, it had already begun. I was 28 the night I left my old life behind. It was raining hard in Boston, the kind of rain that soaked you in seconds. The windows of our cramped apartment rattled with every gust of wind, but inside it was the silence that chilled me most. My husband, Tom, had passed out on the couch, snoring loudly, his rage spent for now. My cheek was swollen. Again. And in the hallway, my 4-year-old daughter stood barefoot in her pajamas, clutching a worn-out stuffed bunny to her chest, her face streaked with tears. That look in her eyes, wide, resigned, too wise for her age, that's what did it. Not the bruises. Not the yelling. But her eyes. And the fact that she didn't cry out anymore. She had already learned that being silent was safer. That was the moment everything shifted. I moved quickly, like someone in a dream. I grabbed an old duffel bag and packed it with what little I could: Rachel's favorite clothes, some snacks, our passports, and a copy of Pride and Prejudice I had hollowed out weeks ago. Inside were $237 in cash, scraped together from grocery savings and tips I had hidden. When I lifted Rachel into my arms, she wrapped herself around me instinctively. "Are we going on an adventure, Mommy?" she whispered. "Yes, baby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The biggest adventure of all." We disappeared into the rainy night, boarding a bus to Dorchester, where an old high school friend had promised us a couch for a few nights. It wasn't much, but it was enough. 2 weeks later, I found us a tiny apartment, just one room with a bathroom barely big enough to stand in. It smelled like cabbage and cigarettes. The wallpaper peeled. The heater clanked. But no one hit me there, no one screamed. And Rachel slept through the night. I found work at a diner serving breakfast from 6 to 2, then changed into a thrifted skirt and blouse to answer phones at a dentist's office from 3 to 9. I was exhausted, always. But Rachel was safe. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. That was the real beginning of our story. Not the wedding. Not the boutique. But that rainy night, when I chose my daughter and myself over fear. Rachel got into Boston University on a partial scholarship. I still remember the day the acceptance letter came. She danced across our tiny kitchen, waving the envelope like a golden ticket. "I got in, Mom, I really got in." Her face was lit with joy, with pride, with the kind of future I had always dreamed she'd have. That night, after she fell asleep, I cried. Tears of happiness, yes, but also fear, because the tuition still loomed large. And what the scholarship didn't cover, I would have to find a way to manage. By morning, I had a plan. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, took on evening cleaning jobs at offices in Back Bay, On weekends, I worked the stockroom at a local department store. I kept going, because that's what mothers do. And Rachel thrived, and Kimi Caesar-ding. She studied hard, made friends, even started dressing more professionally, sleek blazers, elegant heels. When she came home for visits, she'd tell me about her marketing classes, her group projects, her dreams of launching something big. A brand, a boutique, something elegant and modern. She spoke about it with stars in her eyes. After graduation, the call came at nearly midnight. I had just gotten home from a double shift and was about to collapse into bed. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I think I found it." A storefront, small, but full of character. Exposed brick, original hardwood, big windows. "It's perfect," she said breathlessly. "I can see it all. The displays, the collections, the feel of it. But I need help. I need startup money. I know it's a lot to ask, but..." "How much?" I asked. She hesitated. 97,000. The number knocked the air out of me. That was more than I had in savings. But then I thought of the one thing I protected all these years, my retirement fund. Modest, but consistent. Every paycheck, every month, a little tucked away for a someday that never quite came. I met with Sarah Miller the next day, my friend from high school, now a paralegal at a respected Boston law firm. Years ago, I'd let her sleep on my pull-out couch when her marriage fell apart. Now she sat across from me in a downtown office, reviewing the paperwork to liquidate my future. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "I'm sure." But Sarah wasn't done. She added something extra: partnership papers. "You'll retain 51% ownership," she said firmly. "Rachel will be the face, but you'll be protected." I hesitated, but she insisted. "This isn't about control. It's about security for both of you." Rachel signed the papers without reading them. She was too busy dreaming. 3 months later, Rachel's closet opened with cheese platters, plastic flutes of sparkling wine, and a stack of handwritten invitations. I stood in the back, watching her shine. The boutique was beautiful. She was radiant. And I was happy to be her silent partner. Because this was the dream. Ours. For a while, everything felt like it was falling into place. The boutique grew slowly at first. Sales were modest. Rent was tight. Rachel worked 14-hour days, window displays late into the night, back and forth with designers, running her own social media, answering emails herself. I helped in the background, restocking inventory after closing hours, keeping the books clean, paying for unexpected costs without ever mentioning them. Then one day, everything changed. A girl from college, Elisa, I think, came by the store. She was one of those rising lifestyle influencers. She tried on a cobalt blue sheath dress and posted a photo on Instagram with some flattering caption. The next morning, there was a line outside the store. By that afternoon, Rachel had sold out. Suddenly, Rachel's closet was on the map. She was featured in local magazines. Other influencers dropped in. Customers came from across the city. In 6 months, she was eyeing the vacant space next door. I watched it all with joy swelling in my chest. I only visited after closing. That was my choice. I knew I didn't belong to her new, elegant world, the gleaming shelves, the minimalist decor, the polished customers in designer heels. I came late, wearing the same old sweaters and sneakers I'd worn for years, always careful not to disrupt. "Mom, you should come during the day sometime," Rachel would say casually. "Your world, not mine," I'd smile. "I'm just happy to see it grow." But one night, I came by earlier than usual, holding takeout in a paper bag to surprise her. She was at the counter, chatting with a customer. I stood quietly by the racks, listening. "You've created something amazing," the woman said. "How did you pull this off right out of college?" Rachel smiled, confident and glowing. "I built it from nothing," she said. "Just hard work and a clear vision. No one handed me anything." Her voice was light. Her words were knives. "I built it from nothing. Nobody handed me anything." I turned and left without saying a word, the bag of food still clutched in my hand. Outside, I leaned against the brick wall, trying to steady my breath. That was the night I realized I had disappeared from her story. Not just quietly, not accidentally. Erased. I wasn't part of the narrative anymore. I was just the shadow behind the light. A few months after that night, Rachel met David Harrington. She introduced him briefly at a Chamber of Commerce gala, where she was being honored as one of Boston's top entrepreneurs under 30. I had gone with her my first time stepping into her world, in public dressed in a clearance rack navy dress, and with my hair done at a salon for the first time in years. David was polished, wealthy, confident. The kind of man who said your name once and then never forgot it. I could see right away he liked power. And Rachel, in her sleek heels and boutique success, looked like a perfect match for the world he came from. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Dinners were canceled. Calls went unanswered. She was swept up in his world: rooftop parties, wine tastings, vacations in the Hamptons. When we did talk, David's name came up constantly. David thinks the boutique could go global. David's parents know investors. David's teaching me how real businesses scale. He spoke in buzzwords, and she repeated them like scripture. Then one day, I learned about their engagement from Facebook. A photo, her hand on his chest, a diamond the size of a grape sparkling in the sunlight. I said yes to forever, the caption read. No phone call, no warning. I called her that night. "Oh, Mom," she said, breathless with excitement. "I was going to tell you, we've been celebrating. Isn't it amazing?" Amazing wasn't the word I had in mind. 2 days later, I received a message that wasn't meant for me. It was a screenshot from David to Rachel. "Your mom can't sit with my family at the dinner. My parents would be horrified. Put her at the vendor table." I stared at the screen, waiting for her reply, waiting for her to stand up for me. But no defense came. Just another message to me 7 minutes later. "Mom, can you believe the florist wants $1,200 for eucalyptus branches? This wedding is so stressful." That night, I stopped by her apartment, unannounced. She wasn't home, but her laptop was open on the kitchen counter. And there it was. A tab labeled FMA Management. A full strategy document. Bullet points outlining how to keep me out of sight at key moments, how to extract maximum financial support while minimizing my visibility. A comment from David: "After the wedding, it'll be easier to create distance." I closed the laptop and stood in silence. They weren't just forgetting me. They were planning to use me and discard me. And that's when I called Sarah. "I need you," I said. "And I need you not to ask questions yet." Sarah didn't hesitate. The very next day, we met in her home office. Legal pads, file folders, and coffee mugs filled the room like a war room in progress. "If I activate my majority ownership," I asked, "what does that actually allow me to do?" Sarah looked me in the eyes. "It means you can initiate a full audit, freeze the business accounts, revoke any unauthorized contracts, and if necessary take back control of operations." I nodded. "But I won't move unless they give me a reason," I said. She raised a brow. "What will the trigger be?" I didn't answer then. But I knew. And it came on Rachel's wedding day, on that Cape Cod beach, under strings of fairy lights and soft jazz floating from rented speakers. When David turned to me, drink in hand, and said with a smile too polished to be sincere, $50,000. Pay it or vanish forever. When Rachel, in her custom white gown, echoed him with a tone so casual it cut deeper than any scream, or "enjoy your solitude in a retirement home." That was the moment. The one they never saw coming. I lifted my glass slowly, savoring the bitter champagne, then whispered the words I had rehearsed in my mind for weeks. "You forgot one thing?" Their smirks faltered. The flicker of fear in their eyes was brief, but it was there and it was all I needed. "I need to powder my nose," I said lightly. Then I walked away, heels clicking on stone, heart calm for the first time in years. Not out of revenge, but because the moment had arrived. The signal was ready. And so was I. I didn't go to the restroom. Instead, I walked past the marble-floored corridor, across the deck, and down the narrow wooden boardwalk that curved between the dunes. There, tucked in a small alcove facing the ocean, I sat on a weathered bench and pulled out my phone. The sun was setting, casting gold over the waves. I typed one sentence. "Sandcastle time." "Within moments," Sarah replied. "Understood. Packages delivering now. Legal team standing by. Are you okay?" I stared at the horizon for a long beat, then responded. I will be. 7 minutes. That's how long I stayed on that bench. Just long enough to let go of the last strand of hope that my daughter would choose love over image, truth over performance. Then I stood, brushed the sand from my shoes, and made my way back toward the reception, this time from a different angle, staying along the outer path to observe unseen. The unraveling had already begun. The wedding coordinator approached David's parents first. She handed them a sealed envelope with calm professionalism. This was delivered for you, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Similar scenes played out at tables around the venue. Every envelope went to someone who had unknowingly invested in Rachel's closet under David's guidance. Inside each envelope, a legal notice of immediate audit, notification of asset freeze, and Sarah's team's detailed explanation of financial irregularities and unauthorized actions. It didn't take long for concern to spread. David's father was the first to react. His face darkened as he read. He rose abruptly, napkin falling to the floor, and made his way across the venue with thunder in his eyes. Meanwhile, phones buzzed. Rachel's company email, now under my access, sent automated messages to all vendors, clients, and board members. Subject line: immediate business hold, pending legal review. I stepped out of the shadows and walked along the edge of the gathering. David's voice was low and urgent, arguing with his father. Rachel stood frozen, holding her champagne like a shield, her face pale beneath the makeup. Then she saw me. "Mom?" She rushed over, panic rising. "What's happening? Everyone's getting these insane emails about the boutique." I looked her in the eye. "Not insane," I said evenly. "Accurate. I'm exercising my rights as majority owner." David appeared beside her, jaw clenched, the smooth polish gone from his expression. "What have you done?" he hissed, voice low. "I've protected my investment," I replied calmly. "Did you think I wouldn't notice the unauthorized investors? The missing funds?" Rachel's eyes darted. "We can explain, Mom. Please, it was just temporary. We were going to pay it back." "To fund David's side project," I said. "A real estate venture he wasn't confident enough to pitch to his own parents, so he funneled money from the boutique instead." David's face drained of color. Across the lawn, his father was now speaking furiously with a couple holding another envelope. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," David said through clenched teeth. "My family." "Is that why your father looks ready to disown you?" I asked, nodding in the man's direction. "I wonder how he feels about you using a boutique as a personal piggy bank." Rachel looked at me, tears filling her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "you have to fix this. Please. Everything we've worked for." I cut her off gently. "Everything I worked for." She reached for me, desperate. "I'm your daughter, your only child. You can't do this to me." I paused. That old instinct to protect, to forgive stirred for one final time. But then I remembered the spreadsheet, the vendor table, the silence after the betrayal. "I already did," I said softly. "You showed me what I meant to you. I just finally believed it." David's phone rang. Rachel's buzzed again. Emails, legal notices, repercussions. They spiraled into panic. And I turned and walked away. Through the chaos, through the whispers, through the shame that no longer belonged to me. My heels clicked across the wooden deck, steady and sure. Not angry. Not broken. Just done. I left the reception without another glance. At the edge of the property, I slipped off my heels and stepped onto the cool sand, letting the ocean breeze wash over me. With every step away from that glittering disaster, I felt lighter, freer. 3 miles down the beach, Sarah waited in her gray sedan, the engine quietly running. She didn't ask questions, just smiled and opened the passenger door. We drove in silence for a while, the coast blurring past in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to look back. I already knew what I was leaving behind. Not just a wedding. Not just a betrayal. But a lifetime of being needed only for what I could give. Now, I was choosing something else. In a quiet town north of the city, a new storefront awaited, modest, untouched, mine. I would open something small, simple. Built not on sacrifice but on joy, not for anyone else's validation, just for me. Let Rachel have her spotlight. Let David rebuild his image. I had no revenge to savor, only peace to protect. For the first time in decades, I wasn't someone's mother, someone's backup plan, someone's savings account. I was just me. And that was finally enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, it helps more than you know. Have you ever had to walk away to find peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories of quiet strength and redemption, subscribe for more. We're just getting started.
My name is Nora Whitaker, and on an ordinary Thursday afternoon my life changed in a way I will never forget. I had just set a basket of groceries on my kitchen counter when the front door opened and my granddaughter Mia stepped inside. She was only 10, but in that moment she looked years older. Her eyes were swollen and red, her shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight too heavy for her small frame. She did not greet me with her usual smile or chatter about school. Instead, she clutched her backpack to her chest like it was armor. Her voice cracked as she whispered words that froze me in place. "Grandma, please get me out of here. I am scared of my dad." I thought at first she meant Adam, her biological father, but when I looked into her trembling eyes I knew she was talking about Gavin Pierce, her stepfather. My chest tightened, my breath caught. Before I could respond, Mia reached into her backpack and pulled out a small black voice recorder, the kind you would expect to see in an office supply store, cheap and easy to overlook. She set it on the kitchen table with hands that would not stop shaking. "Listen to this," she said in a whisper so faint it barely rose above the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the device, afraid of what it might hold. My finger hovered over the play button, my heart hammering. In that moment I knew I was standing at a crossroads. Whatever came out of that recorder would change everything, and I had to decide whether to keep the fragile peace or stand up for a frightened child. Before that day, I often told myself our family was holding together just fine. Life in Cedar Glen moved slowly, with brick sidewalks, tidy lawns, and neighbors who waved when you passed. My days were filled with small comforts, sewing for friends, watering my flowers, and walking to the market early in the morning. Since my husband passed away years ago, I had poured my love into my daughter Lauren and my granddaughter Mia. Lauren was ambitious. She had worked her way up in an architecture firm, and though I admired her determination, it came at a cost. Deadlines kept her at the office long into the night, leaving Mia to spend more time with me. I never minded. Mia was the brightest part of my life, with her drawings taped to my fridge and her habit of asking endless questions about the world. Her father, Adam Brooks, was a good man who had stumbled. A failed business venture had buried him in debt, and though the divorce was quiet, it left scars. Mia adored him, and even though he saw her less often, his love for her was never in doubt. Then came Gavin Pierce. Smooth, polite, always ready with a smile. He fixed a broken fence post, carried in groceries, and brought fruit baskets when he visited. Lauren's eyes lit up whenever she spoke of him. To her, he was stability, a second chance. To me, he seemed courteous, even generous. I wanted to believe he was exactly what my daughter needed. But Mia's smile started fading. At first I thought it was the growing pains of having a new stepfather. Children take time to adjust, I told myself. Yet in the silence between her words, in the way her laughter grew scarce, I began to sense something was deeply wrong. The shift came slowly, but there was one afternoon I can never forget. I had gone to pick Mia up from school, the same way I had done so many times before. Parents crowded near the gate, chatting about homework and weekend plans, while children poured out like a wave of color and noise. I stood searching the sea of faces, waiting for Mia's cheerful wave. She came out last. Her backpack hung crooked from one shoulder, and her steps dragged as though she were climbing a hill no one else could see. Her head stayed low, and when she finally looked up, her eyes were dull, stripped of the sparkle that once lit my world. "Mia," I called softly, lifting my hand. She flinched at the sound of my voice, then walked toward me, her face pale and her lips pressed tight. The ride back to her house was unbearably quiet. She clutched her backpack to her chest and pressed herself close against me on the bus. Each time I tried to ask about her day, she only shook her head or gave the smallest nod, her gaze fixed on the floor. When we reached Lauren's home, I noticed the details I had overlooked before: a kitchen too clean, a silence that felt forced, and Gavin's black suitcase already standing by the door. He offered a quick smile and announced another business trip, brushing off my questions with impatient glances at his watch. Moments later he was gone. Inside, Mia sat at the table with her hands gripping her backpack straps. I poured hot cocoa, but she did not touch it. The The ceiling fan hummed above us, steady and indifferent. For the first time I felt fear settle in my chest, a fear I could not yet name but could no longer ignore. That evening, when the quiet of the house wrapped around us, Mia finally let her guard down. She sat on my couch, still gripping her backpack like a lifeline. Her small hands trembled as she unzipped it and pulled out the black recorder. She placed it on the coffee table, her lips pressed together until they turned pale. "Grandma, listen," she whispered. I reached for the device, my fingers icy against the plastic. A low hum came first, followed by the creak of a door. Then Gavin's voice filled the room. His tone was low, controlled, each word heavy with menace disguised as care. "Mia, this stays between us. You don't want to upset your mom, do you? If you tell her, she will leave you. Be a good girl." My stomach dropped. I wanted to turn it off, but Mia's hand gripped my sleeve. I forced myself to listen. Her soft sobs were captured on the recording, the voice of a child caught between fear and confusion. Gavin continued with a calmness that chilled me. "If anyone finds out, people will think you're a bad girl. Everyone will hate you." The words slithered like poison. I could hear a muffled protest from Mia, and then silence, the kind that makes your blood run cold. I stopped the tape, unable to bear more. The recorder slipped from my hand and hit the table with a dull thud. My heart raced, tears blurred my vision, and rage rose in my chest so hot it almost choked me. Mia buried her face against me. Her voice was broken, but the truth was clear. "Grandma, every time we're alone, he touches me. I told Mom so many times, but she said I was lying." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as if I could shield her from every hurt she had endured. In that moment, I knew the fragile peace in our family had already been shattered. I took the recorder and placed it in a small tin box my late husband once used for his tools. I locked it with a rusty key. "This evidence is safe now, Mia. No one will take it from you," I said, though my voice trembled. That night, I promised myself one thing. Whatever storm was coming, I would face it. Because silence was no longer an option, not when a child's safety hung in the balance. Lauren came home late that night, shoulders sagging under the weight of another long day at the firm. She dropped her purse on the sofa and kicked off her heels, only then noticing that I was still there with Mia by my side. "Mom, you didn't leave yet?" she asked, her tone tired but sharp around the edges. I pointed to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Lauren. We need to talk." Mia clung to my arm, her backpack still pressed to her chest. I reached into my tote, pulled out the recorder, and pressed play. The hum, the click of a door, and then Gavin's cold voice filled the kitchen. "Mia, this stays between us. You don't want to upset your mom, do you?" Lauren froze, her eyes wide, but instead of horror there was denial. She pushed her hair back, shook her head, and scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Adam must have given her that. He's been jealous ever since I moved on. Of course Mia is repeating whatever he told her." Mia's voice cracked, trembling with tears. "Mom, I told you before, so many times. You never believed me." I felt anger burn in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Lauren, that is Gavin's voice. You think a 10-year-old could invent this? You think your own daughter would beg like this just to please her father?" Lauren stood up, her face red with fury and fear. "You don't understand. Adam has always wanted to ruin things for me. He's turned her against Gavin." At that moment, Mia's small body shook, and she collapsed against me, sobbing until her breathing grew shallow. I hurried to lay her on the sofa, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, whispering that she was safe. Then I turned to my daughter. My voice trembled, but my resolve was iron. "If you won't protect your child, I will. This ends tonight." I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, and dialed Adam's number. My daughter might be blind, but I refused to be. Within an hour, Adam arrived, his face pale but determined. He had heard the tremor in my voice over the phone, and came without hesitation. When he stepped through the door, Mia reached for him instantly, burying her face in his chest as if she had been holding her breath for years. We wasted no time. Together we carried her out to Adam's old sedan and drove straight to the nearest hospital. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Mia clung to me, whispering, "Grandma, don't let go." A young pediatrician greeted us with a calm, professional tone. He spoke directly to Mia, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "You're safe here. Nothing bad will happen to you tonight." Those simple words brought a faint nod from her. They ran tests, gentle but thorough, and asked careful questions. I stayed by her side, holding her hand through every step. When the doctor returned, his face was grave. She shows signs of both physical and emotional trauma. This will require long-term care. We are mandated to report this to the authorities immediately. I handed him the recorder without hesitation. This is what she brought me, I said. He nodded, placed it into an evidence bag, and assured us it would be handled properly. Lauren sat in the corner, silent tears streaming down her face. Her denial was crumbling under the weight of facts. She whispered, almost to herself, I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to tell her anger, but there was no time for blame. What mattered was Mia's safety. The doctor looked at us firmly. The next step is to notify the police and ensure she has protection. You've done the right thing bringing her here. For the first time that night, I felt a small measure of relief. We had taken the first step away from silence and into the light of truth. The hospital called the police while Mia rested under a warm blanket in a quiet room. A social worker stayed close, offering crayons and paper so she would not feel trapped by the questions swirling around her. I sat nearby, my hand on her shoulder, whispering that she was safe. 2 officers came in and spoke with Adam and me about the recording. They promised swift action. One of them said, "We'll place a unit outside the house tonight in case Gavin returns early. He won't get near her again." The assurance was steady, professional, and it gave me just enough air to breathe. Later that night, while we were still at the hospital, news came over the phone. Gavin had been detained at the airport. He had planned to catch a late flight for his so-called business trip, but instead he was handcuffed before boarding. Hearing those words, my knees nearly gave out. Relief surged through me, followed quickly by exhaustion. We returned to my small home, carrying Mia between us. I tucked her into the old wooden bed where her grandfather once slept. She curled against me, her breath uneven, but for the first time in days she managed to close her eyes. Adam sat in the armchair by the window, his face still tight with fury but softened by the sight of his daughter finally resting. Lauren lingered in the kitchen, silent, her hands gripping a dish towel, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. That night, the house was heavy with silence, but it was a silence without fear. For the first time, we knew Gavin could not reach us. Weeks later, we found ourselves in a courtroom, a place I never imagined our family would have to be. The wooden benches were cold, the air heavy with whispers, and every sound echoed as if the walls themselves demanded justice. Gavin entered in an orange jumpsuit, his hair unkempt, his once polished shoes replaced by shackles. The man who had charmed everyone with polite smiles now looked small and hollow. I did not feel triumph. I only felt the weight of what Mia had endured. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. The recording was played, each word of Gavin's manipulative voice filling the silent room. "This stays between us. You don't want to upset your mom, do you?" Gasps rippled through the benches. Some jurors clenched their jaws, one woman wiped away a tear. Then came the testimony. The doctor spoke of trauma with careful, professional words. The social worker described Mia's fear but also her bravery in speaking out. Mia herself was spared from facing Gavin directly. Her voice was heard through the recording, not through her presence, and for that I was grateful. Lauren sat beside me, her head bowed, hands twisting a tissue until it tore. Adam kept his arm around Mia, who stayed in another room with a counselor, safe from the man who had caused her so much pain. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentence was long and unforgiving. A collective sigh filled the courtroom, followed by murmurs of relief. Outside, a crowd had gathered, shouting their anger at Gavin as deputies led him away. I held Mia's hand as we walked past. She looked up at me, her eyes searching for reassurance. I squeezed her fingers gently. "It's over now," I whispered, and for the first time she believed me. After the trial, our lives did not suddenly become easy. Justice had been served, but healing was a slower journey. Mia moved in with me, filling my quiet house with the sound of her footsteps and the clutter of crayons on the table. At night, she sometimes woke from bad dreams, rushing to my room for comfort. I would hold her close until her breathing steadied. Adam visited often, bringing simple joys. They went to the park together, tossed a ball, or sat on the porch sharing ice cream. Each small moment rebuilt a bond that had been bruised but never broken. I could see the light slowly returning to Mia's eyes when she laughed at one of his silly jokes. Lauren came too, more careful this time. She did not demand forgiveness but showed up with quiet gestures, helping with homework, baking Mia's favorite cookies, or simply sitting nearby while Mia drew. The distance between them did not vanish overnight, but little by little, Mia allowed her mother into her world again. Therapy sessions gave Mia a safe space to speak, and with every session she grew a little stronger. Healing was not about forgetting, it was about learning that she was no longer alone, and that truth mattered more than anything. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest part was not just confronting Gavin but confronting silence. It is easy to dismiss a child's words as exaggeration, to assume they do not understand what they are saying, but I learned that silence is dangerous and doubt can wound as deeply as cruelty. 3 lessons stand clear in my heart. First, always believe the child. Even if the story feels impossible, their fear is real, and their courage to speak deserves respect. Second, document and protect. That little recorder, simple and cheap, became the key to exposing the truth. And third, love must be louder than pride. A reputation can be rebuilt, but a child's trust, once broken, may never fully return. To anyone listening who has ever felt the same fear Mia carried, know this: you are not alone. There are people who will listen, who will stand beside you. In every community there are counselors, teachers, doctors, and advocates ready to help. Reaching out is not weakness, it is the bravest step towards safety. If Nora's story touched you, let it remind us all to keep our hearts open and our ears attentive. Share this video so others may find the strength to listen and act. Leave a comment, even a single word, to show that no child's voice goes unheard. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel for more true, human stories where love and courage outshine fear. Because in the end, it is not silence that protects, it is truth. I was sitting quietly at the wedding reception, right beside my 7-year-old grandson Noah. The ballroom glowed with candlelight, white roses lined every table, and the music of a jazz band floated in the air. At first glance, everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. But perfection has a way of hiding danger. Noah's small hand suddenly gripped mine with an intensity that startled me. His eyes, wide and filled with fear, searched my face as he whispered, "Grandma, please, I want to leave right now." My heart skipped a beat. This was not ordinary nervousness. His little fingers trembled against my skin. I leaned closer and asked, "What is it, my love?" "Tell Grandma." Noah swallowed hard and whispered again, "You didn't look under the table, did you?" My chest tightened. Slowly I bent down and lifted the white tablecloth. Beneath the chairs and the shadows of Noah's shoes, a small folded note lay on the floor. I reached for it with a shaking hand, unfolded it, and felt the blood drain from my face. The scribbled words read, "Table 8, add shrimp to the child's serving." I froze. Noah was severely allergic to shrimp. One bite could have been fatal. My name is Helen Parker. I am 68 years old, a widow and the grandmother of little Noah. My life has been a tapestry of both joy and sorrow, and tonight, as I sat in that glittering ballroom, every memory seemed to weigh on me. The wedding was for my son, Daniel Parker, who was remarrying after years of living in the shadow of loss. His bride, Vanessa Carter, stood across the hall, dazzling in her beaded dress, every hair in place, every smile polished as if she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Daniel, my only son, looked proud and relieved. He had struggled since losing his first wife, Emily, a gentle woman who once filled his home with warmth. Now, with Vanessa at his side, he seemed determined to show the world that he had finally found stability again. I wanted to share in his happiness, yet deep inside, unease stirred like a shadow that would not leave. Noah, my grandson, was the light of my life. Just 7 years old, with a smile that could brighten the darkest days but carrying wounds too deep for a child. Since his mother's death, I had become his anchor. He trusted me with secrets, fears, and dreams he could not share with anyone else. He had always been cautious around Vanessa, shrinking back when she tried to touch him, hiding behind my skirts when she spoke too sweetly. And then there was Claire, my adopted daughter. She was not tied to me by blood, but by choice and love. Claire had stepped into the role of protector for Noah, helping him with school, baking his favorite cookies, and filling the void Emily left behind. She was sitting with us at the same table, watching Noah with protective eyes, her presence a quiet reassurance in the chaos of the night. Around us, the ballroom shimmered with elegance. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved gracefully, serving wine and trays of shrimp hors d'oeuvres that Noah dared not touch. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and cameras flashed as Vanessa posed like a queen. Yet beneath all that luxury, I felt an invisible tension tightening around our family. It was the kind of night where beauty covered something dangerous, and only a child's trembling hand could point toward the truth. Before this night of whispered warnings and secret notes, there was a time when our family was whole. I still remember those golden afternoons when Daniel and Emily lived in their small but cheerful house on the edge of town. The garden always smelled of fresh soil and daisies, and laughter echoed from the porch. Emily was a gentle soul with warm brown eyes and a smile that calmed even the stormiest heart. She treated me not as a mother-in-law, but as if I were her own mother. Every time I visited, she greeted me with a hug and a bowl of her homemade chili. "Taste this, Mom," she would say proudly, waiting for my approval as though it truly mattered to her. Noah was only a toddler then, just learning to walk. He would toddle across the yard chasing after a bright rubber ball while Emily watched him with a joy that only a mother could feel. Daniel worked long hours, but when he came home, Emily made sure the house was filled with warmth and food and stories. Their home was not large or fancy, but it was built on love, and that made it shine brighter than any ballroom I would later sit in. But happiness is fragile. One rainy afternoon, everything changed. The phone rang while I was folding laundry, and the voice on the other end, cold, official, unyielding, told me Emily had been killed in a car accident. I still hear the words echoing in my mind. My hands shook so violently I dropped the laundry basket. My world splintered in that instant. The funeral was held on a stormy day, the rain pouring down as though the heavens themselves mourned her. Daniel collapsed at the graveside, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, while Noah clung to me, too young to grasp the permanence of death. He looked up at me with innocent eyes and asked, "Grandma, when will Mommy come back?" My heart shattered. After that, Daniel buried himself in work, using his office as an escape from the emptiness of his home. He returned late at night, too exhausted to talk and too broken to face his own grief. It was Noah who suffered the most. He became quiet, withdrawn, a little boy searching for a mother who would never return. I stepped in as best I could, tucking him into bed each night, whispering stories of Emily to keep her memory alive. Claire also became a lifeline. She adored Noah like a little brother. She baked cookies, helped him draw, and sat with him during long afternoons when silence felt heavy. With Claire's laughter, the house regained some light. For years it was just the three of us, me, Noah, and Claire, holding on to each other, keeping the memory of Emily alive. Those years bound us together, but they also left a wound in Daniel that never healed, a wound that Vanessa later stepped into. The first time Daniel introduced Vanessa to me, I tried to open my heart. It was a quiet Sunday evening, and I had just finished preparing Noah's favorite tacos when Daniel walked in with a glow on his face I had not seen in years. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," he said, his voice carrying both excitement and nerves. Behind him stood a tall, elegant woman in a light blue dress. Her hair was styled in perfect waves, her lips painted in a soft red that curved into a flawless smile. "Mrs. Parker, it is such a pleasure to meet you," Vanessa said, her voice sweet and polite. She complimented my home, my cooking, even the family photos that lined the walls. Her eyes lingered on one picture longer than the rest, the one of Emily holding Noah as a baby. For a moment I thought I saw something flicker in her expression, but it was gone too quickly to be sure. Dinner was full of polite conversation. Daniel looked at her as though she were a miracle, his happiness written on every gesture. But I could not ignore the way Noah reacted. Normally talkative, he sat quietly at the head of the table, pushing food around his plate without eating. When Vanessa leaned toward him and offered a chocolate bar from her purse, his small hands froze. Instead of taking it, he looked down and turned his face away. I saw fear in his eyes, though no one else seemed to notice. Claire, who was sitting across from me, watched every movement closely. She did not speak, but I could tell she was uneasy. When Vanessa slipped her hand into Daniel's under the table, Claire's grip on her glass tightened until her knuckles turned pale. She lowered her head, hiding her expression, but the silence in the room grew heavier than words. After dinner, Vanessa insisted on washing the dishes, smiling as if eager to impress. She hummed softly while she worked, her sleeves rolled neatly up. Everything she did seemed perfect, but perfection can sometimes feel rehearsed. When I looked at Noah coloring in the living room, his crayons clutched tightly in his little hands, I saw him stiffen as Vanessa approached. "What a shy boy," she laughed, forcing her charm. I smiled politely, but inside, something in me remained unsettled. It was the beginning of doubts I tried to bury, doubts that would only grow darker with time. As weeks turned into months, I noticed small cracks in the perfect image Vanessa tried so hard to maintain. At family dinners, she laughed at Daniel's stories, touched his arm as though the world belonged only to them, yet when her eyes shifted to Noah, the warmth disappeared. She became impatient with him, sharp in ways subtle enough to escape Daniel's notice but clear to me. I began to see a pattern that unsettled my heart. One Saturday morning, Vanessa appeared at my doorstep, all smiles. "Mrs. Parker, I'll take Noah to the park today," she announced cheerfully. Daniel was at work, so I hesitated, but I agreed. Hours later, when they returned, Noah clutched his toy car and stared at the ground. His shirt was dirty, his face pale. Vanessa recounted the day with a bright voice. "He had so much fun. Couldn't stop going down the slide," she said. Yet Noah's silence told a different story. When I bent down to stroke his hair and asked, "Did you enjoy yourself, my love?" he only nodded faintly and looked away. Another day, while I was in the kitchen preparing chili, I overheard Vanessa in the living room. Her tone was harsh. "Stay still, Noah. Don't make a mess. You're a big boy now, but you act like a baby." My hands froze on the chopping board, the knife still resting against the onion. I stepped out quickly. As soon as she saw me, Vanessa's voice shifted to honey. "Look at the tall tower Noah built with his blocks. He's so clever." Noah met my eyes, silent, his lips pressed tight. That look pierced me deeper than any words. At school, his teacher pulled me aside one afternoon. "Mrs. Parker, Noah seems withdrawn lately. He talks less and avoids eye contact. Is something happening at home?" Her words were gentle but filled with concern. I brushed it off with a nervous smile. "He's just adjusting to changes," I said, though inside I felt the weight of truth pressing down. That evening, as we walked home, Noah tugged at my sleeve. In a trembling voice he whispered, "Grandma, I don't want to go home with Miss Vanessa." My heart ached. "Why, sweetheart?" I asked carefully. His answer was simple but devastating. "She doesn't love me." Claire heard his words too. She turned away, her shoulders trembling, but she said nothing. In her silence I felt her pain echo my own. All these little signs, Noah's fear, Vanessa's sharpness, the teacher's concern, were fragments of a larger picture I did not want to see. I kept telling myself perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps Vanessa just wasn't used to children. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And I knew that if I ignored it, the cost might one day be unbearable. The day of Daniel and Vanessa's wedding arrived, like a scene from a magazine. The Florida sun poured through tall windows, bathing the ballroom in golden light. Chandeliers sparkled, white roses adorned every table, and the polished floor reflected the glow of hundreds of candles. Guests chatted cheerfully, glasses clinked, and the jazz band played softly in the background. To everyone else, it was a day of celebration. To me, it felt like standing on the edge of a storm I could not yet see. I sat at table number 8 with Noah and Claire. Noah had brought along his red toy car, pushing it back and forth across the tablecloth, as though the tiny sound of wheels on fabric was his only anchor. Claire leaned toward him, breaking off small pieces of bread and smiling warmly. Her presence was like a shield, though even she could not erase the nervous look in Noah's eyes. Across the room, Daniel looked radiant in his navy suit. He moved from table to table, raising his glass, thanking guests, smiling wider than I had seen in years. His face showed the pride of a man who believed he was building a new chapter. Vanessa, in her beaded gown, sparkled under the camera flashes. She laughed loudly, never letting go of her wineglass, posing like a queen. To the crowd she was dazzling. To me she was a mask, carefully painted. When the waiters brought appetizers, I noticed one plate in particular, shrimp laid elegantly on silver dishes, garnished with sprigs of parsley. My breath caught. Noah stiffened. He carefully pushed the plate away and clung to his toy car. I bent closer and whispered, "Don't you like this, my love?" He shook his head quickly, his eyes darting away. For a boy who loved food, this sudden refusal was more than simple dislike. My stomach tightened. Then I caught something across the room. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward our table. For a second, her smile faltered, just slightly, before she turned back to her guests with another flawless laugh. A thorn of unease pressed deeper into my chest. Moments later, Noah's car slipped from the table and rolled onto the floor. He bent down to pick it up, but froze halfway, his small body stiff. Slowly he straightened, his eyes wide and fearful. He grabbed my hand tightly and whispered with urgency, "Grandma, let's go. Please, let's go now." My pulse raced. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He trembled, his lips barely moving as he whispered, "You didn't look under the table, did you?" I leaned down, my heart pounding in my ears. Lifting the edge of the white tablecloth, I peered into the shadows beneath. There, beside Noah's chair, was a small folded note. My hands shook as I reached for it. Under the glow of the candles, I unfolded the paper and read the words scrawled in uneven handwriting, Table 8, add shrimp to the child's serving. The room spun. My blood ran cold. One bite could take Noah's life. In the middle of that glittering celebration, I held in my hands the evidence of a deadly trap. I stood up so abruptly that chairs scraped against the polished floor. The chatter of the ballroom quieted as dozens of eyes turned toward table 8. My hand trembled as I held the folded paper high, but my voice came out steady. "Before we continue this celebration, I need everyone's attention," I said firmly. Daniel hurried over, confusion clouding his face. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his smile fading into worry. I pushed the note into his hands. "Read it," I told him. He frowned, unfolded the paper, and as his eyes moved across the words, his face drained of color. His hands shook as though the paper were burning him. "What is this supposed to mean?" he whispered. Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared at his side, her gown shimmering under the lights. Her face was the picture of surprise. "Is this some kind of joke?" she said lightly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. "On our wedding day." "Really?" She let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow, forced. "No joke," I said coldly. "My grandson is deathly allergic to shrimp. This note instructs that it be added to his meal." Gasps rippled through the room. Guests looked at one another, whispering in disbelief. Some shook their heads. Others stared at Vanessa. A young waiter named Michael stepped forward nervously. His eyes darted between me and the paper. "Ma'am, I recognize that note," he stammered. "A woman gave it to me to pass along to the chef. But I dropped it on the way to the kitchen." His face was pale as he added, "I had no idea it was about the boy. I swear." My heart pounded. "Which woman?" I demanded. Michael shook his head helplessly. "I don't know her name." At that moment, a soft cry broke through the tension. Vanessa's younger sister Sophie stood trembling near the back of the room, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It wasn't me," she sobbed. "It was Vanessa. She gave me the note and told me to hand it to the waiter. I didn't know what it said, I swear I didn't know." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Vanessa's composure cracked. "Sophie, stop this nonsense," she snapped, her voice sharp, her perfect mask slipping. "How dare you lie about your own sister?" But Sophie shook her head, her sobs louder now. "I'm not lying, Vanessa. You told me to do it." Claire rose from her seat, holding Noah tightly. Her eyes were blazing with fury. "If you deny this, we can check the security cameras," she said, her voice cold. The guests fell into a tense silence, every eye fixed on Vanessa. For the first time that night, she had no words. Her hands shook, and her lips trembled. Daniel looked at his bride, horror spreading across his face. "Vanessa," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Tell me it isn't true." But the silence that followed was louder than any denial. In that moment, the celebration turned to ashes, and the truth stood bare in front of everyone. The ballroom fell into a heavy silence. Music from the jazz band died away as if the instruments themselves refused to play. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some covering their mouths in disbelief. The bride who had sparkled moments earlier now stood exposed, trembling under the weight of every eye in the room. Daniel's face was pale, his hands clutching the note as though it were a piece of fire. "Vanessa," he said again, his voice raw, "did you truly try to harm my son?" His question echoed through the room, but Vanessa remained silent, her lips pressed together. That silence was her answer. Anger surged through me, but so did sorrow. I thought of Emily, of the warmth she once brought to our family, and I could not understand how anyone could plan such cruelty against a child. I stepped closer to Noah, shielding him with my arms. "Anyone who tries to harm my grandson," I said, my voice firm enough to cut through the hush, "will never be part of this family." Gasps rippled again, followed by murmurs of agreement from relatives seated nearby. An uncle shook his head in disgust. Unbelievable. On a wedding day, his words carried the indignation everyone felt. Vanessa's eyes darted around desperately, but no one came to her defense. The perfect image she had built shattered like glass. Sophie sobbed quietly at the back, unable to lift her eyes. Hotel security approached, their dark suits contrasting with the glowing ballroom. One of them spoke calmly but firmly. "Mom, please come with us." Vanessa's face twisted with anger and fear. "You're all making a mistake," she cried, but her protests fell flat. No one believed her anymore. With trembling steps she was escorted out, her gown brushing the floor in defeat. Daniel stood frozen, his chest heaving. Then, as if his strength had left him, he knelt down in front of Noah. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "Son, forgive me. I should have protected you." I thought I was giving us a new beginning, but I was blind. Noah leaned into his father's arms, silent but safe. I placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We stopped it in time," I said quietly. My words were meant for him, but also for myself. The glittering wedding had turned into a nightmare, yet at its core, one truth remained: we had protected Noah. And in doing so, we had protected the very heart of our family. In the days that followed the disastrous wedding, the house was wrapped in silence. The phones rang endlessly, relatives calling with their opinions, neighbors whispering about what had happened, but inside our walls, words were scarce. Daniel no longer wore the confident smile he had carried into that ballroom. Instead, he moved with the heaviness of a man who had seen his world collapse in front of him. Each morning he quietly drove Noah to school, and each afternoon he brought him home. He rarely spoke, but his eyes told the story of guilt and heartbreak. He had wanted so badly to rebuild his life, but in doing so, he had nearly put his son in danger. I did not blame him. Love can blind us, but I knew he needed time to heal, and so I focused on what mattered most, making sure Noah felt safe again. Claire became the steady flame of our household. Every morning she packed Noah's lunchbox with care, always avoiding any food that could trigger his allergies. She slipped in little notes, drawings of smiling suns or kites with tails that made him grin when he opened the box at school. "Aunt Claire, you draw better than my teacher," Noah told her one afternoon, his laughter ringing through the house, like a melody we had not heard in far too long. On weekends, Claire took Noah to the park. I watched them from a distance, seeing him chase kites or laugh on the swings, his face finally lit with joy. Each giggle was a balm for my heart, proof that the darkness Vanessa had brought into our lives could not win. One evening, after a small fall on the playground, Claire knelt quickly, brushed the dirt from his knees, and whispered, "It's okay, I'm here." Noah's smile in that moment was brighter than any candle in that cursed ballroom. Daniel began to notice too. I often caught him watching Claire as she cared for Noah, his expression filled with gratitude and something deeper, something he had ignored for too long. The walls that grief and betrayal had built around his heart slowly began to crumble. And then, one evening at dinner, Noah looked up from his plate, his voice small but clear, "I want Aunt Claire to be my mom." The table fell silent. Claire blushed, her hands trembling, but Daniel's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, hope flickered in his gaze. Daniel sat frozen at the dinner table, Noah's innocent words hanging in the air like a fragile truth no one dared to touch. Claire lowered her head, her cheeks flushed, but a soft smile spread across her lips. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Then Daniel reached across the table, his voice trembling. "Claire," he whispered, "I was blind. I let my grief and loneliness cloud my judgment. But you've been here all along. You've protected my son when I failed to. I don't ever want to take that for granted again." Tears welled in my eyes as I watched my son finally see what had been in front of him all this time. Claire looked up, her eyes glistening, and simply nodded. Noah beamed, his little hand reaching for hers, as if sealing a promise none of us could put into words. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, I sat by the window, staring at the moonlight spilling across the yard. My heart was still heavy with the memory of what had almost happened, but it also carried a newfound strength. We had survived betrayal, we had faced danger, and we had chosen to protect each other. That was what family truly meant. I realized then that family is not built on appearances or perfect smiles in a ballroom. It is built on sacrifice, on trust, and on the courage to stand up when something feels wrong. Vanessa's glittering mask had fooled many, but in the end, truth cannot be hidden. And while her absence left questions and scars, it also gave us clarity. We knew who we were, and we knew who we could trust. As for me, I carry Emily's memory with me still. I see her in Noah's eyes, in the way he laughs when he feels safe, in the way Claire now holds him as if he were her own. I believe Emily would be proud not of the heartbreak we endured, but of the love that carried us through it. To anyone listening to this story, I leave this thought. Sometimes the smallest whisper, a child's trembling words, a folded piece of paper under a table, can reveal the truth we most need to see. Pay attention to those signs, they can save a life. If this story has touched you, I invite you to share it, to comment where you are watching from, and to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength of love and the power of courage. Because even in our darkest nights, it is kindness and bravery that light the way forward.